Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Parks Victoria's 7th webinar in our Marine National Parks series for 2022, celebrating 20 years of Marine National Parks here in Victoria. I want to start by acknowledging traditional owners across Victoria and the country that whatever country you might be on. In my own particular case, I'm speaking to you today from Wadawurrung country down on the Bellarine Peninsula, and it's a great pleasure to be joining you. Tonight we're going to have a special opportunity to have a look at the different ways in which we can actually connect directly with our Marine National Park system, and certainly a great chance to explore some of the great adventure activities and other means of actually getting in personal contact with our Marine Protected Area system. My name is Mark Rodrigue. I'm the Program Leader for Marine and Coast at Parks Victoria. It's my pleasure to be hosting tonight. Tonight we're also going to be joined, and our lead presenter for this evening is actually going to be Tess Hoinville. Tess is our Marine Diving and Monitoring Officer and has a wealth of experience in the diving space. I just want to introduce Tess and get her to say good day to us all.
Hello everyone, my name is Tess Hoinville. As Mark said, thanks for the warm welcome. Looking forward to having a chat with you today about all things wet.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tess.
Hey Mark and Tess, sorry. I just want to interrupt. I think maybe you might need to start again. I'm not sure if we've sent this live. I know there's a delay, but it's not coming through to me.
It's live on mine. I've got it live happening on my screen at the moment, Michael, with Tess.
Okay, apologies for interrupting.
Thanks.
It's my device.
And if the voice of God I was just about to introduce anyway, tonight we're being supported by not the voice of God, but by Dr. Michael Sams, who's our leader of our Marine and Coastal Unit, who's doing the behind-the-scenes work, as we've just heard, looking at the Q&A, and also just keeping us on task if we happen to go slightly off topic. Tonight, just before we get into the presentations itself, I just want to talk briefly about the Teams format that we're actually using tonight. As you'd be aware, this is a Teams live event. In the information that's been sent to you, you'd be aware of the fact that your microphone and your cameras have actually been switched off. That's just to try and help to make sure that the presentations go smoothly. But there is actually some great ways for you to interact with us and actually ask questions of Tess. In the Teams app, you'll find a Q&A function. It's a little bubble thing with a question mark in it with Q&A underneath it. It may be on your main screen if you're using a PC or a tablet device, but if you're using a phone, there's 3 dots that you might see at the top of the screen or at the bottom of the screen. If you look through those options there, you'll certainly find a Q&A function. If you want to start by putting your names into the Q&A, just simply introduce yourself, just give us your first name, and if you know what country you happen to be on, that'd be a great way just to test out the system, make sure it's all working. But Michael will be waiting for your questions, and what we'll be doing is sorting through the questions when we get towards the end of the presentation. Tess is going to be happy to take all your deep and meaningful questions and give us a response to those. So please do, if you've got any questions, pop them in the Q&A. Likewise, if you've got any comments or you want to add something to what's being discussed on the screen, or just ask a general question, maybe share some information with others, please use that Q&A function as well. You may, again, depending upon which format of Teams you're using, also be able to provide reactions. So if you like something, you want to heart it or laugh or whatever it might be, just use those functions just to keep it a little bit interactive in terms of the way we use it. In previous webinars, some people have had some interruptions to the streaming service, and our suggestion for you, if you do happen to sort of like run into a brick wall like Michael may have a moment ago, the best thing to do is to go out, back into the original link that you received, close it down basically, and start again, and that should enable you to catch up with where we're up to in terms of the presentation itself. So hopefully no major issues there, but if you do have any challenges, just remember, log out and come back in. That seems to have worked for everybody that's had some issues previously. So right now, I'm going to hand back over to Tess, and we'll get this presentation set up and underway. So handing over to you, Tess, for your introduction, and I'll get your presentation up on the screen.
Thanks, Mark. I think my presentation should be up.
Excellent. So it's just sending through now, and here we go. All good. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your amazing work in organising this webinar series for all of us out there, for the invitation to present, and of course to all our virtual marine frothers. It is fantastic having you all along, and I'm really looking forwad to tonight's webinar. So I am coming to you from Gunai country. However, home for me is in Wadawurrung country, so on the Bellarine Peninsula, which is depicted here through the eyes of Billy J. O'Toole. And in a previous life, before I worked for Parks Victoria, I worked on a number of different local licensed tour operators in this area, so exploring the South Port Phillip area. And on one tour in particular, I had the absolute pleasure of being a snorkel guide for a group of traditional owners who were coming together from all across Australia to connect, support each other with their journey of self-determination. And on this tour, while we were exploring South Port Phillip, which a long time ago, for some of you that may not know, it used to be land with just the Yarra River running through it, or Birrarung. And this area was a major food source and meeting place for local Indigenous people, and not just from Wadawurrung people, but multiple groups of the Kulin Nation. And on this tour, I was told a Bunurong story, which I have been given permission to share with others, and it really struck me. So I'd like to share with you all today. The story tells of a time of conflict, actually, among the Kulin Nation, when people were arguing and fighting and neglecting their families and land. This chaos and disunity angered the sea, which began to rise, and it had covered the plains, and it was threatening to cover the entire country. Traditional owners speak that the people went to Bunjil, which is depicted here in this artwork, their creator, the wedge-tailed eagle, and asked him to help stop the sea from rising. Bunjil agreed to do so, but only if the people would change their ways and respect the land and come together. He then walked out to the sea, raised his spear, and ordered the water to stop rising. So tonight, I'd like to pay my deep respect to any Aboriginal people with us, and as well to elders past, present, and emerging. This story really touched me because right now, as we sit here, one could argue there is still disunity, that we are neglecting our country, and the sea is angry and rising again. So it makes me reflect just how much we rely on our country and our sea country, and how we need to understand, respect, and better care for it. And how the Victorian Marine National Parks and Sanctuaries, by having these areas defined for this purpose of protection, really helps us on this path. We've had some truly amazing webinar series throughout the last few months, celebrating 20 years of our Marine National Parks and Sanctuaries. And these have been from a tour across the state with our chief conservation scientists and marine rangers, history of our journey with the amazing Mark Rodrigue, thank you, looking at our amazing biodiversity with Dr. Michael Sams, and some of the challenges we're facing and also what we've learnt. For a lot of us though, maybe for you, it's really hard to understand and to really develop love for something unless you can experience it firsthand, which is why today we are going to be taking a plunge and looking at ways to get wet in our marine protected areas. Now, I've got no idea who we have out there in virtual land. And maybe it's just my mum and some supporting colleagues, but I would like tonight to be as electronically interactive as humanly possible. So if you can, please do what Mark Rodrigue has suggested by entering into the Q&A function throughout our presentation. That would be fantastic. And we could have a mix. We could have some really experienced divers out there. We could have some first-time snorkelers, but I'm just one person and I'm going to be sharing my information and my knowledge, but you could have something that you can contribute to this conversation as well. So it is a question and an answer box. So if you have something more that you'd like to contribute so that we can all learn from you, please add that in as well. And we'll be definitely having a long time at the end of this presentation to talk through any questions that we have. And if it's possible, yeah, give me love hearts, give me claps, hands, give me thumbs up, give me thumbs down. That will make it even more enjoyable. I'm definitely a more face-to-face person, so it's more interactive. That would be best for my part. But what are we going to cover today? So we are going to be taking the plunge and looking at how we can actually access our marine protected areas, predominantly with a snorkeling or scuba diving focus, as that is my bread and butter and what I absolutely love. But we will also look at it from a couple of other activities. So whether you're interested in kayaking or surfing as well. We're going to look at the local knowledge that you need to access these areas, when it's going to be enjoyable, but also when it's going to be safe. We're going to be touching on a few other safety first matters when exploring along our coastline, understanding and learning how we can minimise our environmental impact if and when we go to these areas, how to get involved with Parks Victoria if you don't already know, some of my top picks across our beautiful coastline, and some take-home messages. Okay, first we'll just do a little recap of what are we talking about. So this is a map of our Victorian coastline, and we've got our 24 fully protected areas either in dark blue or numbered. So 13 marine national parks, and these are really large areas, and 11 marine sanctuaries, which are quite small defined areas, but these are all high level of protection, no take zones, so no extraction is allowed in them. And then we've also got some light blue sections around South Gippsland and Bass Coast, if you can see them there. And these are a combination of either marine park, marine reserve, or a marine and coastal park. So these are a lesser level of protection, so you can do some extraction activities like recreationally fish. So for the purpose of today, I'm going to be inclusive of all 30 marine protected areas across our state. But yeah, just wanted to highlight the difference, and also just again where they are across our state. So no matter where you live, we do have a representative system across the whole area. So there is one relatively close to you. Cool. But how do we get there? So there's really two ways of accessing our marine protected areas, and that can either be personally or through a licensed tour operator. So if you haven't heard of the term licensed tour operator, or LTO, we love using little short versions of words. So LTO, then essentially it's a company that will allow you to get out in the environment, and this will be, they might offer different services. So on one hand, you could have a licensed tour operator that has gear hire, has instructors, and they'll take you on a guided snorkel tour. Or on the other hand, you might have a dive charter where they'll provide access to a dive site, and we'll have the knowledge of, what site would be good under the current weather conditions. But all the equipment and your own training would already have to be, you'd already have to have all the know-how. So there's a real mix, but for anyone that is, a first timer or that doesn't have any information about how to get into our environments, this is a really good starting point to help you, make that first step or dip that first toe in the water. And we've got them all across the state. What I wanted to do tonight is just highlight exactly how many we do have, and that they do vary across the state. So in total, we have 129 operators across our marine protected areas. If we're looking specifically at scuba diving, there are 11, and these operate across 5 different marine protected areas. So that's probably our smallest number. Scuba diving is a little bit more involved, whereas if we then jump to snorkeling, there's a total of 29 operators, and this is across 17 marine protected areas. So over half of our areas have an operator for you to go snorkeling, which I think is pretty great. I will just make a note with the total number of 129. You can see obviously all the numbers are higher than that because a number of operators do multiple activities, so don't be confused by that. So next step down, if we're having a look at kayaking, surfing, or coastal walking, there's 90 different tour groups that will offer this type of experience, and this is across 24 out of our 30 parks, and then of course wildlife or boat tours, so 49 and 14, so just under half. You can get out on a boat and explore our areas. If you do have your own equipment though, or if you do have some know-how or a friend with know-how, then of course you can also recreationally access our marine protected areas via vessel or shore. So again, I just wanted to highlight how many of our areas are accessible in the right conditions. So from the shore, we have got 13 marine national parks or sanctuaries that are accessible, and an additional 5 with that lesser level of protection. If you've got a vessel though, another 5 are accessible to you. And then the somewhere in between, so this is places like Cape Howe Marine National Park or 12 Apostles, where it is adjacent to a coastline, but really you can't really access it from the coast because it's too remote, or the dive sites are too far out. So somewhere in between should really be added onto the vessel at Tally as well. But what this highlights is that you can access a lot of our beautiful areas by shore. So keep that in mind. But if you are going to go there on your own without a licensed tour operator, then it's really important that you have an understanding of what will be enjoyable but also safe. So you need to have local knowledge of this area. And this can start with the weather. It's a pretty obvious one. I'm still amazed that right now it's the 14th of December in summer and it's 15 degrees and like 40 knots westerly. So today would not be a good day to go out to most of our marine national parks and sanctuaries. So it's really important that you have an understanding of our wind, both strength and direction. So if you can think about, say, Ricketts Point Marine Sanctuary, if you had a wind coming from the northeast, it would be protected by the land. So we call this offshore, which means that it'll be a lot calmer on the ocean. Whereas if the wind direction is blowing onto the shore, onshore, then it's really choppy and not very nice. So think about the wind direction and also the strength. So even if it is a strong wind, there's a lot of places that are still protected due to the way of the land. So they might still be accessible even in moderate or strong wind, but you need to have an understanding of that. There's also, of course, the swell, and this can be ground swell, or it can also be, driven by wind. So it's important to understand especially if you're accessing some of our sites by shore, you don't want to be getting dumped by a massive wave and losing all your gear on your first attempt to get into one of our marine parks. Tide height and tide stage. So some areas are better on an incoming tide, a rising tide, or an outgoing tide, as well as tidal stream. So the only area in our state that has really intense tidal streams is in the south part of Port Phillip, at that entrance. It's like a plug hole, a full bath. So there's a lot of water movement to make way through that tiny funnel in between the tide rising and falling. So it can at times get up to 6 knots, which is, a little bit over 12 Ks. So really, it's like a fun ride if you're going there with that purpose. But otherwise, if your plan is to stay close to shore, getting swept out to sea is not on your forecast or not on your plan. It's really important to understand the water movements. And there's sites, for example, Cottage by the Sea, which, although it's not in one of our protected areas, it is better to be snorkeled or scuba dived on an ebb tide. So when the tide is coming in versus when the tide's going out, rather when the tide's coming in. So having that local knowledge to understand when is the right time, and maybe even to access areas. So maybe a sandbar is, you can't get out of the Barwon River to go and explore Barwon Bluff Marine Sanctuary because you need a certain tide height to get out of the river safely in your vessel. So all things to consider, as well as forecasted rain and rain radar. So Michael, if you haven't done already, you can add into the chat a few of the links that I have on our local knowledge. So I've got some links for you all, which is various apps which will give you some of this information. And as well, go and explore and learn some of the areas yourself, and you can teach them to me too. So next one down, vessel traffic. So it's really important that you understand where you can actually snorkel, scuba dive. Some areas, it's, a commercial port, best to avoid these or any high traffic areas, as well as particular fishing seasons. So although we are talking about, you know, predominantly marine national parks and sanctuaries where you can't fish, there could be fishers transversing through a marine protected area to access somewhere that they can fish. So really important to give yourself that space. And although you may have a dive flag, you know, vessels can't always see them. So if it is a high traffic area, I'd recommend staying out of it. This is a very sore spot for a lot of us out there if we are snorkelers, water quality. So unfortunately, with all the rain that we've been having, it has affected our water quality. So having an understanding of where you want to access and its proximity to a catchment or a river is really important. And also if we've had any rainfall, and also clarity for enjoyment. If say there's been a few days of really big swell, but then it clears up and it's really calm, the visibility might still be reduced from, you know, that large swell of the previous days. So having an understanding about what affects our water quality and clarity, as well as dangerous marine animals. We do love all our marine life out there. Everything has a purpose. However, some things can hurt more than others. So some of our marine sanctuaries in Port Phillip do have some high urchins. If you watch one of the previous webinars, it was talking about our management of some of these, but the last thing you want is to be walking out bare feet and to stand on an urchin. So important to understand where they are and wear the right equipment. So wear booties, as well as raise if you're accessing a site from shore, rather than stepping in on the sand, shuffling your feet so that you can't actually step on it. Instead, you'll slide your toes maybe under a ray and scare it off, as well as jellyfish. A few people might recall last summer we had so many lion's mane jellyfish in Port Phillip, and they're not deadly by any means, but they do still pack a sting. So if you get one across the face or hand, it can hurt. So if there is an area particularly high, you might want to avoid it. For equipment, there are so many different options. I could talk the rest of the webinar just on equipment, but rather than going through that, you can ask the experts. So there's so many shops around Melbourne, so many dive shops and centres that have experts that you can ask about what equipment you should have, from thickness of wetsuits to open or closed heel fins, as well as different snorkels and different face masks. So ask the experts will be my advice there. In one of the links we are putting up is also from the Ricketts Point Marine Care Group, and it's this document that was developed for snorkeling at Ricketts Point and other marine sanctuaries, and they've actually got some information in there on snorkel equipment as well. So there are other ways to gain this information, as well as our Parks Victoria park pages. So there are a lot of, or every single one of our parks has got a page associated with it. Some have more information than others, and some down the bottom have secondary links. So a lot of maps and divers guides so that you can get more understanding. The divers guides are amazing, and a lot of them have come from our fantastic friends groups, which is our next one down. So our friends of groups or marine care groups often develop a lot of resources, and they're just a great community group. If you live in an area where there is one, it's that, you know, way to connect with people that are like-minded and interested in the same thing as you. And there's someone that can give you that guidance or that support in your first time getting out in one of our marine protected areas. There's also quite a few different social media groups. In another slide, I list the two that I think are most active. So we'll come back to that, as well as internet and radio. So Triple R every Sunday, Radio Marinara, do some talks for an hour on all things wet and salty, and they are absolutely fantastic. You learn fascinating information. So there's a plug for Triple R. They do have a podcast as well, so you can listen back if you ever aren't awake at 9 a.m. on a Sunday. And there's also some great websites. I have used Scuba Doctor websites so many times. So they've got a map. The link should be coming up in the chat, but there's a map across all of Victoria, and it's got a plethora of information. Sometimes it includes the ideal conditions for a site or things to be cautious of in that area, what level it is, what depth it is. It's a great resource, so definitely have a look at that if you haven't already. And YouTube channels, I don't know how people have so much time on their hands, but a lot of people actually will, film themselves and put it up on the internet. So if you have some time, then get out there. And last but not least, have a look. So I can't even put a figure to the amount of times when I've thought, yes, everything is aligned. The wind is low. There hasn't been big swell. Today's going to be the best day. And I go down to the beach and there was a factor that I've forgotten about and it looked terrible. So of course I wasn't going to get into the water. So try and gain all this knowledge, but go and have a look. And ultimately that's what's going to tell you at the end of the day if you are or are not getting in the water, by having a look and looking at it from a safety perspective and also from an enjoyment perspective. So that takes us into safety, which as the marine diving and monitoring officer, it's one of my focuses in my role. So it's most important that we go and have fun, but that we all come home at the end of the day. So most importantly, we sort of touched on this already, but only dive where permitted and avoid high traffic areas. So if it is a commercial port, don't dive in that area, avoid big ships, that sort of thing. Have a look at getting some professional training through one of our licensed tour operators. And I will just, go back. So for our licensed tour operators, Parks Victoria does have a web page. So if you're interested in doing a specific activity in a specific park, then you can use our website to find what operators are available to you. And that will be one of the links that the fantastic Michael has put in the chat for you. And we will be sending all these links out to you after the webinar as well. So don't worry, they're coming. But yeah, look at getting some professional training. And this is required for scuba diving, but it's only recommended for snorkeling. So, you might also have a friend that's very experienced that can show you the ropes, so to speak. But if you have an expert, an instructor go through, how to snorkel or how to scuba dive, then that's going to really help you on this journey. As we've touched on, know the appropriate conditions, check the weather, check the tide, check the swell. Never swim alone, always have a buddy. And most importantly, I will put my hand up, I am sometimes bad at this, maintain buddy contact. So make sure you can always see your buddy. Sometimes I see something really cool and I go off following it, and then I realize that I've gone a bit too far away from my buddy. So maintain your buddy contact, because then you can show them whatever cool thing you'll see as well. Always snorkel or scuba dive within you and your buddy's limits. So just because you might be able to snorkel down to 5 meters, it doesn't mean that your buddy can. So definitely make sure that you're staying within your limits and don't push those limits. Always stay within safety margins. Display a dive flag, really important if you're going off the shore, to tow a float and a dive flag, the bigger the better for your safety. But also if you've got a vessel, then make sure that you display a dive flag on your vessel. Use the right equipment. So again, ask the experts what equipment is good and use the right equipment. Tell someone your plans that isn't going with you, so that if something happens, then you've got someone looking out for you, just like Michael looking out for me today. And when traveling to sites, stay on defined tracks. So this is more leading into our next slide, which is minimizing our impact, but really important that if you're going to a remote area, stay on the defined tracks. Observe and follow all safety signage and barriers, and do not jump off piers or jetties. It's fun, but unfortunately it's very unsafe and not a great idea. So protecting our marine protected areas. So the last thing we want is to go to these special zones and actually have a negative impact on the environment. So we've actually got minimal impact guidelines which have been developed, and although these are developed for mainly targeting our school groups that are going down maybe to a reef flat like a rock platform, of the shoreline. It's making sure that they have a lesser impact for those larger groups, but it's relevant to everyone. So if you're a teacher out there and you haven't, if you're not aware of our minimal impact guidelines, please have a look. The link is coming into the chat. But of course, yeah, it's relevant to all of us. So there's something we can all learn here. So having that awareness and respect for cultural values that exist within our park areas, we should make sure that we're aware of these, and also refraining from visiting culturally sensitive areas unless maybe a Parks Victoria staff is with you and has given permission. As well as that, tread lightly. So really important, we want to reduce any erosion and also staying on the path. As I mentioned earlier, this reduces the spread of diseases and weeds and also stops you from getting lost. So that's a bonus. We also want to make sure we leave nothing behind. So take only memories and leave only footprints. We don't want to leave any rubbish into our areas. There is no away. It is just into another area and it can be harmful to our marine life and ultimately end back up with us potentially. So we've also got potentially some conservation issues. So if you identify any sensitive areas that should be avoided as a large group or just at certain times of the year, such as our little hooded plovers or other beach nesting birds, as well as fragile dune systems. We need our dune systems to help us with our rising sea levels, so make sure we keep them nice. We also want to make sure that we do good practices. So if there is, this is usually more relevant to land-based activities, but if there is a boot washing station available, then please use it. But often for us in our marine protected areas, we won't find that. Also, plan visits to avoid critical moments for an ecosystem or species. If you can learn about them, that would be great. And just taking note, like I said at the start of the presentation, that our marine national parks and sanctuaries are that high level of protection, so no take zones, so not removing anything from the area. Even an empty shell, that could be the home of a hermit crab in the future. So leaving everything where it is and having minimal impact while we're there. So for our fauna and flora, I kind of like to think, we like to think that our presence doesn't disturb things, but it does, just our presence does. So it's really important that we try and minimize that. So viewing from a safe distance, not getting too close to animals. And to help you understand this, I have put a link into, it's actually something from South Australia, but it's a code of conduct for snorkeling or scuba diving around sea dragons. So our picture here on the right is the beautiful weedy sea dragon, which is Victoria's marine emblem. And while they are absolutely beautiful and great to photograph, I personally have seen people actually putting their hand under a weedy sea dragon so that it swims a little bit higher, and then they get a photo of it with the water column in the background. But they have such a tiny sensitive swim bladder that you can actually be having a major impact on that individual. So understanding how you can impact something is really important, and if there's creatures out there like our beautiful weedy sea dragon, we don't want to be disturbing them. So taking a photo, keeping from a nice distance, and then letting it be, moving on to have a look at something else rather than bothering it for a really long time is really important. And then also our flora. So our seaweeds, they're really important as well. Some things like the Neptune's necklace on our reef flat, they're the only algae that forms a canopy on a reef flat. So underneath, there's all these different mobile invertebrates living in there. And if you remove that, then they're like, oh, the sun. So really important to respect and leave things as they are. Help us help the environment. So make sure you do the right thing and know what rules apply to you. So for example, the Marine Mammal Guidelines in Victoria is, informing you of the distances to keep away from various marine animals, from dolphins to whales or even seals. So if you're out on the water on a jet ski, you have to stay further away than what you have to on a boat. And then there's some licensed tour operators, which because it's permitted and regulated, they are allowed to get that little bit closer. So understanding what rules apply to you is really important because they're made for a reason. And again, it's to minimize our impact. We also have a risk of marine pests through us entering the water and going to another area if we have got a hitchhiker or a little bit of larvae with us. So making sure that we adopt the check, clean, dry method to help stop the spread of marine pests. So whether this is just your wetsuit and dive gear or the hull of your vessel, it's really important to check it, clean it, and let it dry properly from going one place to another place. It's also really helpful if you are getting out and snorkeling or diving, learn the identification of some of the marine pests that we have in Victoria, and take photos and report sightings to Agriculture Victoria if you think you've seen like a new species in the area that is yet to be defined. It's also great if you're out there exploring, you're the eyes and ears. We Parks Victoria staff can't be everywhere, and neither can the Victorian Fisheries Authority. So if you do see illegal fishing, you can call 13 Fish and report that illegal activity. And I know in a couple of other of our previous webinars, people have mentioned that fisheries don't always come. If you do call 13 Fish, you know, they're not necessarily in the area or have the capacity to respond. However, that information does get recorded, and then they can develop sort of understanding if there's peak times, which then might in the future change their compliance patrol times and programs. So it is really important. Every report is used. You just might not see it in action on the day, but it really does help. So please, if you see illegal fishing, report it. And next. All right, if you want to get involved. If you haven't heard this already, then there are numerous ways to get involved with Parks Victoria marine activities, and these are all done through Park Connect. So you can get access and volunteer with us through them. Some of the activities that we do are Sea Search as well as Reef Watch with the Victorian National Parks Association. So we do the sea slug census and Great Victorian Fish Counts and a few other activities that are Parks Victoria specific as well. However, you can also go with the VMPA to do other activities like the Dragon Quest or Oyster Watch and Marine Life of Victoria on iNaturalist. Also Coast Care with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. If you're not aware, with the recent election and government changes, this department is going to become DECA, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. So start getting your head around that. So there's numerous ways to get involved, and some of those Facebook groups that I mentioned earlier. So the two that I think are the most active, which, you know, Mark Rodriguez, jump in at the end, but Marine Friends Network of Victoria, as well as Snorkeling Melbourne Victoria, people are constantly putting up information or questions like, oh, I really want to go and dive Bunurong. Can someone tell me the right conditions that I need? And people will respond. So there's amazing networks out there for you to get information. And now my top picks. So I'm aware of time and I want to have a bit of time for some questions at the end. But I've got 3 slides here. So beginner, intermediate and advanced levels of snorkeling or scuba diving. So to start off with, Rickers Point Marine Sanctuary off Bayside in one of our North Port Phillip Marine Sanctuaries. It's such a large area and there's numerous sites, but it's you know, it's great to snorkel there a lot of the time. So generally it's best on a north to southeasterly wind so that it's not onshore, and to avoid diving with strong southerly or northwesterly winds because it's just onshore and it's not very nice. Just before high tide should give you the clearest water. But it does get affected by our water quality. So one of the links earlier was through to the EPA beach report, and that actually has, throughout summer, they do water quality testing, and they did start it early this year due to the flooding events. This area isn't affected by groundswell, so you know there's no surfing around our North Port Phillip area, but you can get some, you know, waves from strong winds forming and crashing onto the rock. So definitely making sure you're going there in light winds. Always go with a buddy, carry a dive knife, and tow a buoy with a dive flag. So there is a community group. There's the Marine Care Ricketts Point group. And there's also licensed tour operators. So there's 5 different ones that offer snorkeling in this location and 1 for scuba diving. If you've got a vessel though, rather than a shore, then my pick for beginners is Pope's Eye. This place gets visited very regularly, and this is the photo that you can see here, one of the amazing Australian fur seals that haul out on Pope's Eye, which is in part of the Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park. It's beautiful, and I think the fish are so used to people that they don't really get scared or move out of their way. They in fact come and check you out. It's so great, such an amazing experience. And there's also the beautiful Australasian gannets nesting there as well. So ideal conditions, light winds, that's going to be a common theme. And it's best to dive at slack water after the flood tide, start of the ebb tide. So you'll need to have a look at the RIP slack times to understand what that is about. Caution note for this one, it is a potential for a higher traffic area because it is such a beautiful spot, so keep that in mind. And there can be strong currents on the outside of the annulus. So you can Google Pope's Eye, and the inside is like a pool, about 5 meters deep, and the outside gets down to about 12, or recently we did a dive and got to like 12.2 meters deep. And yeah, there's seals and gannets in the area, so that's pretty amazing. For community groups, there is the Friends of Mun Island, which is not actually part of Pope's Eye. It's another section of the Port Phillip Heads Marine National Park, but there are so many licensed tour operators that operate in this area, and a lot of them have social dive clubs, so there's ways to connect with people. Like I said, there's so many LTOs, so 10 for snorkeling, 8 for diving, and then a lot of sightseeing or wildlife tours available if you just want to go and have a look at some of these furry friends. For intermediate, shore-based, I am going to take you to our west coast, Marai Marine Sanctuary, and this is best dived at low tide. We're on a low swell and light offshore northerly winds. You can see Willy Weather as a guide for the tide times and the height of this tide. I will caution for this area, so we are getting into the intermediate area. This is prone, the west coast is prone to surge and swell. And just an FYI, you can no longer access Middle Island, which if you Google it, have a look on Google Maps, you can see there's a couple of islands in the area for Marai Marine Sanctuary. There is a community group though, so Friends of Marai Marine Sanctuary, get in touch with them if you're interested, if you haven't met someone already. And there is a licensed tour operator that is very well priced, I have heard. So you can do a boat tour, wildlife viewing, sea kayaking, and marine education. Oh, sorry, no snorkeling and dive operations. I think I need to update this. Just last week I heard that there's actually someone that does snorkel tours. So I need to follow up on that. If you do have a vessel, then what is shown in this image is Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary. This blew my mind. Such an amazing area to dive or snorkel. We want light winds. Direction can be varied depending on what side of the island you're actually diving on. And caution for this area, the boat ramp is currently being upgraded. And previously you needed a higher tide for launching and retrieving your boat. So once the new boat ramp is upgraded, it'd be worth noting and asking the locals what tide height you need to safely get your boat in and out. It is a seal hole outside as well, and there is the amazing Friends of Beware Reef, but no LTOs in this park. And finally, advanced location. Number 1, back on the west coast, is Point Addis Marine National Park. Again, being on the west coast, a lot of swell, a lot of waves in this part of the area, which, you know, part of Point Addis Marine National Park is Bells Beach, so I think that says it itself. So only a couple of days a year is this area really accessible. Very exposed shore site. So only dive when the seas are flat and calm and very little swell. Conditions are usually best with no wind or after a few days of northerly, so it's really calmed down. And some of the cautions for this site, it's the conditions vary considerably, and like I already mentioned with the swell, but also there can be strong winds and squalls frequently occurring with deep water, rocks and reef, and some rip feeder current running out past the headland. So always go with a buddy and be extremely careful, and only for experienced divers and snorkelers. This one, there is the Friends of Point Addis Marine National Park group, and there's a few licensed tour operators for this area. So 5 for snorkeling, 2 diving, 2 kayaking, coastal walking, boat tours, and of course 6 for surfing. Finally, we have got one of my favourite sites or areas, if you do have a vessel, is Wilson's Promontory and Corner Inlet Marine Protected Areas. As you saw on that map originally, there's a lot of different areas there, so I'm just going to class them as one. But a real diversity of habitats across these areas, from the amazing Posidonia seagrass beds that is pictured on this image with the lovely seahorse in Corner Inlet. Lots of sponges and invertebrates live in here as well. And then, going down to Wilson's Prom, just amazing blue water, large canopy forming brown algae, and in the right areas, deeper sections, beautiful sponge gardens. And ideal conditions, there's sort of too many to say because I've said such a large area, so various depending on exact area that you're diving, but a few cautions out there. So tidal river, in terms of access, so tidal river you can launch from, but you need 4-wheel drive access. And because tidal river itself can move, sometimes the boat ramp is closed, so definitely want to double check with Parks Victoria if it's open prior to travelling down there. Make sure you have sufficient fuel if you're going all the way to Wilson's Prom Marine National Park from Port Welshpool. There's seal colonies in the area, so consider the time of year. Probably best to go down there out of seal pupping season. And Corner Inlet is considered coastal waters rather than inshore waters. There's also channels in Corner Inlet, so it gets very shallow in between sections. There is the Latrobe Valley Scuba Diving Club that go down into this area, so you can get involved with that community group if you live in the area. And there's a few licensed tour operators. So snorkeling in Corner Inlet, there's 1. Wilson's Promontory, there's 4. No diving, but there are other activities like wildlife viewing, boat tours, kayaking, surfing, and even stand-up paddleboards. So they are my top picks. And lastly, I just wanted to show this. So this is Point Addis Marine National Park, and just the difference in a few different days. So it is the same area being photographed. So the top left is on a lower tide. You can see the reef is exposed, and it's got pretty good visibility by the looks of things. There is still a little bit of wave action, but it does look fairly calm. To the top right, it looks calmer yet again, but a higher tide and maybe slightly lesser water quality or water clarity. And the bottom left, we're starting to get some waves in the area, but it's still on that lower tide, so you can see the reef is exposed, and then some waves on the bottom right with a higher tide. So in the same area, all the examples that I've just given, beginner, intermediate, advanced, in some instances, those beginner sites would actually be advanced in the wrong conditions. And likewise for, Wilson's Prom or Corner Inlet, in those perfect conditions, it would be, like a swimming pool. So it's really important. There's so much variation, and our marine and coastal environments are wonderful, and a bit weird, but also wild. So always put safety first. And whether you're getting in or getting on the water, take a moment to stop, think, plan, and act accordingly rather than just jumping in. Thank you very much. I have gone a little bit over what I was initially thinking, but we've still got some time left. So I hope we have got a lot of questions in the chat. And thank you, Mark.
Fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Tess. That certainly makes us all keen, I think, to get out and in the water. I mean, unfortunately, as you say, at the moment, the weather conditions are not really inspiring us with clear water and calm seas. But anyway, all good on that front. Also great to hear some tips on keeping safe. I think that's incredibly important, that we, might enjoy and love to get out in the environment, but at the end of the day, we all want to come home at the end of the day to our friends and families safe. Fantastic to also see what's on offer at different parts across the state. Look, just a couple of quick questions from me to start with. You did mention in your discussion there Merri and Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary. Could you just tell us where those places are? I know where they are, but maybe for the audience it might be just useful to know. And similarly, Point Addis might not be familiar to some.
Yep, so Point Addis Marine National Park is very close to Anglesea. It sort of stretches from Bells Beach, so Torquay, down towards Aireys Inlet. So that's the section of coast there for Point Addis. Merri Marine Sanctuary is just off the river at Warrnambool, so it's further along our west coast. Ricketts Point and Pope's Eye, they're both in Port Phillip. So Ricketts Point, North Port Phillip, whereas Pope's Eye is in the South Port Phillip area. Beware Reef is off Cape Conran, so we're taking a leap over to East Gippsland, and Wilson's Prom. If you don't know Wilson's Prom, it's that bit that sticks out at the bottom, South Gippsland.
Fantastic, good on you. Thanks, Tess. Look, just a quick one again. I mean, you've had the chance, you probably dived or probably swum actually from one end of Victoria to the other at some stage, but have you got a particular site that you love more than anything? It's probably like asking you to choose between your best friends, but do you have a favourite site in Victoria that you've dived or snorkeled at?
Yes, definitely. And I was very lucky. I've been lucky to dive here a couple of times. So actually Beware Reef Marine Sanctuary would have to be my top pick. It's just got such an amazing diversity, both from towering macroalgae producing these, underwater forests, and then this just expansive colours of sponges and invertebrates as far as the eye can see, and also some beautiful wrecks of the area. So it's called Beware Reef for a reason. It only jots out of the ocean a very small amount. So previously, before we had our high-tech systems like we have now, has caused a few shipwrecks, but they're there to explore as well. And then you've just got the Australian fur seals coming down, looking at you, asking, "Want to play?" So it really just ticks so many boxes for me. So yeah, so far that's been the one that has truly underwater taken my breath away.
Fantastic, and I think I'd have to agree with you. I mean, I'm again a bit like you. I've been lucky to actually visit quite a lot of sites, probably not nearly as many as you, but Beware Reef is really one of those places that you just sort of got that mix of sort of warmer stuff from the east coast as well as the southern waters. It is really quite a sensational place, and a fantastic. I'll shout out to the community group up there, the Friends of Beware Reef, and the ranger team that look after that incredible part of the world. Fantastic. Michael, I might just throw to you. I noticed there was not a huge a number of questions. Would you like to just come in and provide your top picks in terms of some of the questions from our audience?
Sure, we've got a couple of good questions though coming through. So Tess, this is from Kayla. How can I get involved in ocean surveys, for example, censuses? My open water 16-metre licence.
Yep. So for volunteering with Parks Victoria, there are steps to get involved as a scuba diver. We do have safety is our focus, so you can get involved with diving and Parks Victoria, but you do need to be 18 years or older, or be diving with a parental or adult caregiver, which then they obviously need to have the respective training, and you're held to the volunteers are held to the same standard of safety that we have. So having an occupational dive medical, as well as a certain level of training. So we can take open waters, but you're fairly restricted in the areas that you can dive. That high level, so rescue and advanced certified, will mean that you can dive with Parks Victoria at a lot more dive sites. So there is a cost associated with having those relevant certifications and keeping them up to date. So that is often a barrier to come diving with Parks Victoria. However, there is also other groups that you can dive with. So or go snorkeling with us. So we do offer more. It's a lot easier to get snorkeling with Parks Victoria, and there was that slide with some of the activities that we do, and they're all published on Park Connect. So that Park Connect is definitely go to see what Parks Victoria is doing. And there's also the Marine Partnerships page, which Michael would have put up in the chat, and that's got links to other groups that you can get involved with. So whether it's Sea Search, which is Intertidal, or Seagrass, which is Parks Victoria as well, sorry, but other VNPAs, so Victorian National Parks Association, Reef Life Survey, and Coast Care, but that's not in the water as well.
Beautiful. And look, just you mentioned doing some surveys or doing some work with Parks Victoria. What sort of activities or monitoring do volunteers actually get involved with from an in-water perspective?
Yep, so we have both the Great Victorian Fish Count as well as sea slug census, which we directly run and manage in collaboration with the Victorian National Parks Association. But some of our volunteers has also helped us with rapid health assessments, which is when we're going out into our environment, and it's a survey method that we use at Parks Victoria, and it's having a look at how healthy a system is and looking for any threats. So whether there's invasive species present or signs of anchor dragging or any pollution in the area. So rapid health assessments, and also some of our conservation programs, we utilise volunteers, and we really couldn't have as big an impact without them. So in our North Port Phillip sanctuaries, volunteers have been helping us manage our overabundant native purple urchin.
Fantastic, thanks Tess. Michael, over to you. Any further questions from the audience?
Yep, we've got one more that I might throw to, and I'll just mention I popped in the links, some of the links to those organisations that Tess has mentioned, and including Reef Life Survey, which is a one to aspire to. Have to be quite an experienced diver for them, but that's a program that we utilise a lot in our monitoring programs, but need to be quite an advanced diver to work with them. So here's one from Jason Tess. With the advancement in technology, especially equipment like sea scooters and propeller equipment to assist with diving, have you in your experience seen any impacts on wildlife or ecosystems when these have been used in marine places?
Great question, and I'll just have to take a moment to think about it. I think short answer, no, I don't think we've actually visibly seen or recorded anything like that. We've definitely noticed in some of our higher visited marine protected areas, it's more common to see damage on the seabed, like sponges, or on some of our, say, pylons of piers from fin damage from people accessing these areas. So definitely something that you want to think about when you are diving or snorkeling, staying off the bottom and not hitting those pylons, being aware of where you are so that you don't have an impact. But yeah, great question. Sorry, I don't know the answer completely.
Good on your Tess. No, that's a great answer. And again, we've always, those of us who love the environment need to always be mindful of what impact we're having. If we do have access to some of that high tech in things there, again, be very mindful of what your effects might be on the places surrounding you. All right, Tess, well, thank you again so much for the wonderful presentation tonight. I'm just going to pop myself back up on the screen there, but we're talking about you in the primarily, but this has been a wonderful presentation. I think it's given us all some food for thought in terms of both places to go and visit, some skills perhaps to develop, some opportunities in terms of reaching out to some of the organisations that are well equipped to support us in our journey of discovery and connecting with our marine environment. So please take on board a lot of the great advice that Tess has provided through our presentation tonight. It's probably also sadly a good time to say thanks to Tess in general for the work that she's been doing in Parks Victoria. For us, very unfortunately, this is Tess's last week with PV. She's taken up a really exciting role in the marine program team at Deakin University. So we're very sad to see you go, Tess, but we also, on behalf of the Parks Victoria Marines teams, all of the people you've worked with in Parks Victoria, but also our marine volunteers, our agency partners, etc. You've been a great support to all of them. So thank you so much for your contributions to our marine programs. Thank you, participants, all of you out there in the land of the World Wide Web and who've joined us tonight or joining us in the future, looking at one of the recordings for your interest in our marine protected areas. For those of you who may have joined for the first time tonight, we do have a backlog, as Tess mentioned earlier. We've got 6 previous webinars that we've been hosting every month in celebration of our 20 years of marine national parks in Victoria. And again, as Michael's put up in the chat previously, and I'll certainly be sending out in our correspondence links to all of those things. So please do see this as an opportunity to jump in and discover some of the things that you may have missed out on in the past. I'll also be sending out to you all a bit of an evaluation survey. This has been a fantastic effort on behalf of many people from PV and elsewhere to deliver this particular program. So we're keen to obviously hear from you in terms of what you liked, maybe some suggestions if we do something like this in the future, ways in which we can do it better. So please do, if you get when you do get the email, take the time, the 5 minutes or so it might take to provide us with a little bit of feedback on what we've actually done this year and how we can actually do things better for you in the future. But let's make that a wrap for tonight. Thank you again so much for joining us all. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this series of Marine National Parks at 20 years webinars, and I hope that that's given you some incentive to go out and discover what an amazing incredible marine environment we have on our doorstep here in Victoria. The weather, as Tess has said a number of times, may not always be the best. The water clarity might not be quite what it is in Queensland at times, but it is certainly a fantastic place for discovery and learning. So please take the opportunity, put that mask and snorkel on, get in the kayak or the canoe, go for that walk along the coastline, that beautiful cliffs or the fantastic beaches, and discover what we've got the great opportunities we've got here in Victoria to really appreciate protected areas in the sea and marine national parks and our marine sanctuaries across Victoria. Thanks for joining us and look forward to catching up with you sometime around summer. Bye for now.